Hello from Jihad and the World, a podcast that explores the connection between Western and Islamic cultures. The author is Mark Silinsky of Kensington Security Consulting, where we bring education to national security. Today, we start a 10-part podcast series about the mass murder at Fort Hood, which was a killing in the name of Islam carried out by an American soldier in Texas. The series is called Rampage, Mass Murder at Fort Hood. On the afternoon of November 5, 2009, the balding, portly, 39-year-old U.S. Army Major Nidal Hasan strolled into Fort Hood's Soldier Readiness Processing Center. He turned to the only civilian in the waiting area and calmly asked her to leave. Hidden in his clothing were an FN-57 pistol with green and red laser sights and a .357 revolver, which he carried as a backup weapon. Also concealed were nearly 24 magazines, each holding 20 rounds, which he claimed would be enough to accomplish his mission. Now inside the base, he watched soldiers talking and filling out paperwork for their upcoming deployment to Afghanistan. He shouted, "Allahu Akbar," and opened fire on his fellow soldiers, who were completely caught off guard. At first, Private Second Class Alan Carroll chuckled at Hasan's Arabic shouts. Later, he would say, "I thought he was just joking around." Another soldier thought it was a paintball game. But soon, heads turned to the pop, pop, pop of firecrackers, and then to screams of pain. Unarmed and unsuspecting, Hasan's victims were defenseless against his brutal attack. In the chaos, some soldiers realized that they had been struck by bullets only when they saw their own blood. Others recalled the rounds feeling like sledgehammers or baseball bats slamming into them. The shots tumbled through flesh, shattered bones, and ruptured organs. Many of the injured remain haunted by the cries of dying and the acrid smell of the blood. The first to take a bullet at 21 years old was PFC Naji Hull, who was hit twice in the back and once in the knee. He shuffled into a nearby cubicle and hid. Reservist Dorothy "Dory" Karskaden was shot 4 times while completing paperwork. Both soldiers survived. Kukulis saw from his hiding spot that Hasan looked at his victims, some of whom just stood their ground. They didn't flinch, and they didn't whimper. They were looking at fate, and they knew it. PFC Kam Sheong, 23, continued his family's military tradition. During the Vietnam War, his father fought communists in Laos. His younger brother served in the Marines. His 8th-grade teacher recalled, his greatest attribute was his ability to make everybody smile. Sheong was among the first to be killed at Fort Hood while waiting in line for a flu shot. Soft-spoken and determined, Sergeant Amy Sue Kruger had already served in Iraq and was preparing to deploy to Afghanistan. Earlier, she explained to her family, "We need more people to serve there." Hasan shot and killed her. Trying to make sense of the chaos, soldiers realized that the attacker was wearing an army uniform. "He's one of ours! He's one of ours!" a female lieutenant yelled as Hasan kept spraying rounds into soldiers. Many of the bullets hit their targets. 21-year-old Private Francesca Velez was expecting a baby. Cheka, as she was affectionately known, became pregnant in Iraq. Hasan shot her as she pleaded for the life of her unborn child. My baby, were her last words. A generation older than Cheka, Lieutenant Colonel Juanita Warman, who was shot in the abdomen, begged to be allowed to tell her family that she loved them. She never got the chance because she died at the scene. The gunfire continued relentlessly. Witnesses described how Hasan sprayed bullets in a fan-shaped pattern before targeting individual soldiers. Psychiatric nurse Captain Russell Seeger requested to be sent to Afghanistan to help emotionally distressed combat personnel. His frontline experience gave him insight into his emotionally traumatized comrades. Now at Fort Hood, Captain Seeger tried to save lives by rushing at Hasan, who shot and killed him. Eyewitness Sergeant Michael Davis said, "The rate of fire was pretty much constant shooting. It sounded like an M16. Bright red and green beams from the shooter's laser gun sight illuminated the dust particles. Rounds tore through backs, arms, and necks as the wounded crawled for cover. Hasan changed magazines too quickly for anyone to stop him. He had practiced at the range, but some personnel in the center confronted the shooter. Grizzled senior Michael Grant Cahill, armed with a folding chair, charged at him, and Hasan shot him dead. The 62-year-old took 6 shots. Posthumously, he was awarded the Army Medal for Valor. As a boy, soft-spoken specialist Frederick Green of Mountain City, Tennessee, was active at Baker's Gap Baptist Church. A church superintendent said, "He was one of the finest boys you ever saw." His fellow soldiers called him the silent soldier because he never complained and often volunteered to help. Hasan shot him 12 times, and he died. At 19 years old, Aaron Nemelka from West Jordan, Utah, was the youngest to die. Like Frederick Green, Nemelka was also a man of faith. PFC. Nemelka was shot 3 times while lying on the ground. SSG. Justin Michael DeCrow was the son of a Vietnam War veteran and father to a 13-year-old daughter. He wrestled and played football in high school. But this sturdily built soldier had no defense against the bullets that killed him. Major Lebardo Eduardo Caraveo, the youngest of 7 children from a poor Mexican family that immigrated to Texas when he was a boy, put himself through college and earned a doctorate from the University of Arizona. Deeply patriotic, he pledged, "If God helps me, then I am going to help people." He died that day on the killing floor. Passionate guitarist PFC Michael Pearson, 21, of Bolingbrook, was shot 3 times, in the spine and the chest. Surgeons worked desperately to save Pearson, even bringing him back to life twice on the operating table, but he had lost too much blood and died. However, many of those shots survived. Sergeant Alonzo Lunsford saw the laser train on his face, and he instinctively closed his eyes. He was shot 7 times, collapsed to the ground, and started to sing Amazing Grace, but could not get past the first verse. Hasan searched for those hiding. He trained his laser sight on Theodore Kukulis, who was concealed under a desk. Kukulis hoped Hasan would shoot him in the back of the head so he could die instantly. Instead, the major moved on, and Kukulis survived. After Hasan left the building, Kukulis emerged from his hiding spot and began assisting with triage. Later, he would describe the wide grin Hasan wore as he gunned down soldiers. Nurse Shameka Hairston called 911 for help. She was crouched under a desk at the processing center where the shooting started. "Oh, God, help me," Hairston said, as the operator kept asking her for the location of the shooting. She opened her eyes and saw a soldier stand up during a pause in the gunfire. His eyes got big, and he fell. All active duty soldiers at that time were preparing for deployments to either Iraq or Afghanistan. One of the victims, retired Lieutenant Colonel Randy Lee Royer, was shot in the leg, breaking his femur a few inches above the knee. Royer needed a cane to walk to the stand. He described hiding in a cubicle during the shooting. Unable to walk, he stayed inside the processing center throughout the entire incident. When it was over, he said the building was deathly quiet. Soldiers down, shooter down. Michelle Harper had worked at the center for 6 years drawing blood. Startled by the gunshots, She turned and saw Michael Pearson fall as he took his last breaths. Along with several others, she dialed 911. Captured on tape, Hasan's gunshots were heard, as were Pearson's dying breaths and moans. "Oh my God, there are a lot of people, 15, probably more," cried Nurse Kimberly, Regina Huseman, who also called 911. "He's a soldier." "Oh my God." Calmly, Major Hasan exited 42003 and reassured surprised civilians that the chaos of screams and gunshots was just an exercise. But he, like many of his victims, would leave Fort Hood on a gurney, near death, and permanently crippled. After Hasan left, survivors began shouting, "Mass casualty! Mass casualty!" and "Soldiers down! Soldiers down!" SSC Maria Guerra yelled, "You train for this! You train for this! Let's go!" Medics and nurses quickly emerged from hiding to help their fallen comrades. A medic marked the foreheads of several dead with the letter D to indicate who needed aid. By coincidence, a documentary filmmaker was there filming a school graduation, but instead he captured footage of the wounded, using their gowns as makeshift bandages. PFC Amber Barr, 19, applied a tourniquet to a soldier and carried him a short distance before realizing she had been shot. The bullet entered her abdomen and exited through her back. She survived. Nurses and medics entered the building and secured the doors to prevent Hasan from re-entering. They then turned to the wounded and rushed to help them. Some later remembered that the floor was so soaked with blood, it was too slippery to quickly reach the screaming and pleading victims. Outside, Hasan searched for more soldiers to attack. The police had been compromised, and 2 officers sped to the scene. Fort Hood police officer Sergeant Kimberly Munley and her partner started her shift that day by washing her squad car. Responding to urgent calls for help, she arrived at the center to see soldiers shouting, "He's that way! He's that way!" She saw Hasan, who aimed his weapon at her. Then I saw a red flash of a laser cross my eyes. "I pulled the hammer back on my weapon to get an accurate shot," Munley said. "We began to blindly exchange fire." Hasan was faster to draw, and Munley's gun jammed. Hasan's rounds hit her in the hand, thigh, and knee. As she lay wounded on the ground, Hasan kicked away her weapon. But before he could fire a killing shot, Munley's partner, Mark Todd, shot at Hasan. Later, Todd recalled, "He turned and fired a couple of rounds at me. I didn't hear him say a word, he just turned and fired." The 2 exchanged gunfire, and Hasan was hit by 5 rounds from Todd, who kicked the pistol out of his hand and placed handcuffs on him as he fell unconscious. Someone yelled, "Shoot her down!" Hasan was rushed to a hospital, received treatment, and was later incarcerated. By the end of the shooting, he had fired 146 rounds inside the facility and 68 outside. Blood donation centers in Waco, Killeen, and Scott, and White Hospital in Temple became overwhelmed with people donating blood. The list of those murdered and wounded at Fort Hood includes individuals of many different ethnicities, different religions, genders, national origins, and races. Some were soldiers, and some were civilians. All were members of the U.S. Army who were murdered during an Islamist rampage at Fort Hood. Thank you for listening to this episode of Jihad and the World. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. Next week, we will cover Fort Hood and Killeen, Texas, the last home of Nidal Hasan and those he murdered. If you have first-hand knowledge of the Fort Hood attack, please reach out to us. Our latest book, Cauldron of Terror, Hamas, Israel, and the World, will be available in July 2026. This podcast does not represent the official position of the United States government. Until next time, goodbye from Kensington Security Consulting.